So this one takes on a particular story I was not familiar with, but I was familiar with stories similar to it. And it deals with a farmer played by Christopher Walken, who, back in the late 90s, gets sued by Monsanto, which I believe is one of the biggest agricultural companies out there. And yeah, like the title might suggest, it's one of these mega corporation versus the little guy kind of movies. And those never fail to rile me up, and this one was no exception to that rule. And I guess it comes down to the fact that the little guy usually never even stands a chance. They are generally just regular people trying to get by when a bunch of lawyers come knocking, threatening to take away everything they worked for all their lives. And most often they're compelled to settle and cut their losses because fighting will be costly. Meanwhile, these companies have basically unlimited resources and can afford an army of lawyers and consultants and whatnot. And even if the little guy manages to win, there's usually still a high cost to it. Because these legal battles take years and are just plain stressful beyond belief. And yeah, this particular case is pretty much a classic case of a major company picking on a little guy. Of course, trying to set a precedent and scare everyone else into submission in the future. And as I said, I was familiar with similar stories involving Monsanto and their agricultural business shenanigans. And I knew it was a huge problem, particularly in India, but all over the world, where farmers by the thousands were getting into insurmountable debt. Now this one deals with a Canadian farmer, but it does touch briefly on the situation in India as well. And they are intrinsically connected because they deal with very similar situations. Now I do think this is a great story and one worth telling, and I thought it was a decent movie. But only decent because I don't think the filmmaking here was particularly great. Tonally it felt a bit uneven, often employing this sort of whimsical score that just felt like a huge contrast to the subject matter and the seriousness of the situation. And for instance, in one of the early scenes, they shot a harvesting sequence like it was an action scene, complete with a thumping and thudding intense score, and yeah, that felt a bit silly to me. And Zach Braff as the lawyer just didn't really work for me because he couldn't help but to insert his usual comedic self into the scenes as well. And in all fairness, that might have been the script's fault, because when he was playing it straight, I had no problem with him. But I also wasn't a huge fan of Christina Ricci in this either. It felt like she overacted. It came across as inauthentic and insincere, and yeah, that stood out to me as well. So there were some clear problems here, but in general, the way the movie was shot and edited was fine. I mean, the pacing was good, it just kept chugging along and I was never bored with this movie. I also had no problems with Christopher Walken in this movie, and he kinda played it, well, surprisingly toned down and restrained, I would say, which I liked, so there's that. But at the end of the day, it's really the story that carries this movie, and as I said, it's a great and compelling story. However, as a whole, it's not a great movie, so I feel like giving this something like a solid 6. Boop. But should you watch it? Yeah, why not? It's a fairly compelling and informative movie as well. So you know, you might even learn a thing or two, or maybe you won't, or maybe you don't want to. In which case you can probably skip it or do whatever you feel like. After all, I'm not your dad. But hey, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen it? Did you like it? Let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up or sub to the channel, because that would be fantastic.